Western countries pledged to fund the development and construction of one of Uganda's largest oil infrastructure projects, the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, valued at around $5 billion. The project was designed to transport Uganda's crude oil through Tanzania, which provides access to the Indian Ocean. With significant investment support expected from the United States, if successfully completed and integrated into global export markets, the pipeline could potentially generate billions of dollars in revenue and significantly boost Uganda's economy. However, Uganda made a move that the Western countries disapproved of. As expected, the Western countries said they would stop the funding because they wanted to use it as a leverage later. It meant that Uganda would have no chance to climb because the pipeline's construction would completely cease. At that time, China surprised the West by coming to Uganda's aid, but it's not nearly as simple as it seems. Why did the West decide to stop investing? What does this pipeline mean, and why is China supporting Uganda? After watching this video, your view on China, Uganda, and Western countries will change. Now let's get started. First, let's define the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, or EACOP. We promise it will surprise you. The East African Crude Oil Pipeline, EACOP, also known as the Uganda-Tanzania Crude Oil Pipeline, is a major crude oil pipeline project that was started in 2013. The goal is clear: transfer crude oil from the Kingfisher and Telanga oil fields in Uganda to the port of Tonga in Tanzania, which is situated directly on the Indian Ocean. The foundation stone was placed in 2017 as a symbolic gesture. This crude oil will subsequently be distributed throughout the entire world. Uganda is exploring oil development under the China National Offshore Oil Corporation, particularly with Telinga, which is managed by Total Energies and Kingfisher. Total Energies has the biggest ownership position, 65%, followed by Tanzania, 15%, the National Oil Company of Uganda, 15%, and NOC, 5%. The project's cost has increased dramatically to $5 billion. Surprisingly, the 24 Western banks who decided to withdraw were replaced by Standard Bank and the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. This enormous project will be the world's longest electrically heated crude oil pipeline when it is finished. The EACOP was supposed to start in March 2016 at the Busaruka sub-country of the Hoima region, close to Lake Albert in western Uganda, the pipeline across the Albert Rift. Traveling an incredible 110 kilometers, going through the Rakai district of Uganda, arriving in Bukoba, Tanzania, round Lake Victoria's southern beaches, and ending the festivities near the port of Tonga on the Chongoleani Peninsula. The Kingfisher oil field was discovered in 2006 on the eastern bank of Lake Albert, right on the boundary between Uganda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Northeast of Kingfisher, in the district of Bulisa and Nuwaya, lie the Telinga oil fields. With a 56.6% share, Total Energy leads its market alongside Sinuk and Unok. Their plan? Develop 6 fields, including one right in the middle of Murchison Falls National Park, and drill more than 400 wells from 31 locations. By December 2021, when the Ugandan Parliament approves the East African Crude Oil Pipeline Special Provisions Bill, establishing Uganda's involvement in the project's construction, operation and maintenance, which is expected to cost $3.5 billion, Uganda has invested $293 million, of which $130 million is already in the bank. Using a similar card, Tanzania enacted its legislation in August 2021. As of March 2026, construction was slated to start in August 2016, with a 3-year timeline and a $4 billion budget. In addition to roughly 15,000 construction employments, this large investment was expected to create 1,000 to 2,000 permanent jobs. The Daily Monitor newspaper reported that Total E&P was prepared to pay a hefty $4 billion to fund the creation of the ECOP. After high-level discussions in Uima, led by oil ministers of Tanzania and Uganda, it was announced in July 2016 that the work on the 1,143-kilometer pipeline would start in January 2017. The ultimate objective of the project was to be completed by 2020. However, the building budget for the 1,145-kilometer pipeline was lowered to $3.5 billion by August 2017. As of September 2020, and Total Energies signed a host government agreement with the Ugandan government, allowing the final investment decision to be made before the year is up. Construction on the pipeline was expected to begin in the first quarter of 2021. In April 2021, significant agreement was signed by President Museveni of Uganda and Suluhu of Tanzania, as well as notable individuals like Patrick Puyene of Total Energies and Chen Zui-Biao of CNOOC Uganda. The first oil was projected in 2025 and construction was scheduled to start in July 2021. The project's total cost surged to $5 billion in August 2021, with $2 billion allocated for equity investment from the pipeline owners and the remaining $3 billion to be acquired from other sources. You see, the East African crude oil pipeline is a massive project that might fundamentally alter Uganda's economic landscape. To enhance its standing in the global energy sector, this massive project, which is 1,243 kilometers long overall, intends to transport crude oil from Uganda's rich Albertine Rift Valley to Tanzania's crucial port of Tanga on the Indian Ocean. The ECOP is more than just a conduit of oil. It is a glimmer of economic prosperity for Uganda. The pipeline is expected to generate substantial amount of revenue through taxes and royalties, which might help alleviate the country's persistent poverty and usher in a new era of riches. The generation of jobs is another important benefit of the ECOP to Uganda. It is anticipated that the pipeline's development and operation, along with the oil resources in the area, will lead to an increase in employment opportunities, particularly in rural areas, would boost the economy and promote the exchange of skills and the growth of human capital. Additionally, the ECOP has the ability to diversify Uganda's economy, which now relies heavily on agriculture. The establishment of the oil industry would give the country's economy a new dimension and make it less susceptible to shifts in the agricultural sector. This diversification would increase the resilience and stability of the economy. The potential for energy security is likewise linked to the IECAP. Due to its present heavy reliance on imported oil, Uganda is vulnerable to fluctuations in the global oil price as well as supply disruption. The pipeline would encourage energy independence and reduce reliance on outside sources by allowing Uganda to produce its own oil. This is due to the fact that the pipeline would provide Uganda access to a refinery that could produce enough oil to meet its demands. This greater independence would result in cost saving and a more dependable energy source for the country. Furthermore, the ECOP would enhance regional cooperation between Tanzania and Uganda. The building and the operation of the pipeline would create stronger ties between the two nations, promoting collaboration in trade security and infrastructural development. Increased economic integration and shared wealth may result from this improved cooperation. But before you learn how China has saved the pipeline, you first comprehend how the West tried to exploit it and made false promises. The pipeline initially attracted a lot of attention from Western nations, especially the United States, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. Western countries provided grants and loans to fund the project. For instance, a $325 million loan from France Development Agency was used to create the ECOP. In addition, the Western countries pledged to offer insurance and guarantees to lower the financial risk associated with the EACOP program. For instance, the World Bank Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency (MIGA) has provided political risk insurance to shield investors from potential losses resulting from unforeseen circumstances or political instability. Despite this insurance, the Western countries stopped making investment. Soon, more details will be accessible. By promising to contribute their expertise to the development and implementation of the EACOP project, Western countries make fake promises and elevated them to a fanciful level. For instance, the UK government promised to provide technical assistance to the Ugandan government with a focus on environmental and social safeguards to lessen the negative consequences of the project. Initially, the West planned to make investment to benefit from the pipeline. The EACOP project's potential to find more oil deposits in Uganda attracted Western countries seeking to diversify their energy sources and reduce their dependency on Middle Eastern oil. Access to these assets may have increased stability and energy security for Western nations. Leave a remark in this space provided below to contribute your voice to Africa's liberation for more educational videos like this one. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's move forward. Tanzania and Uganda, the two principal participating nations, also benefited economically from the EACOP project. The building and operation of the pipeline was expected to boost government revenues, generate employment opportunities, and promote investment in many economic sectors, encouraging the overall economic development of the area. Uganda was then duped by the Western countries. The Eastern African crude oil pipeline was once envisioned as a revolutionary infrastructure project to transport crude oil from Uganda's Albertine Rift to the Tanzanian port of Tanga in the Indian Ocean. Among the Western countries interested in this massive project were the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. Even though these nations had first expressed interest, they ultimately chose to cease any financial assistance. This followed the widespread dissemination of falsehoods about the pipeline. Western countries' propaganda primarily focused on the potential environmental impact of the EACOP project. The pipeline's route across sensitive habitats like wetlands and forests raises concern about habitat loss, deforestation, and disturbance of wildlife corridors. Environmentalists said that the project could accelerate climate change, harm endangered animals, and destroy biodiversity by emitting greenhouse gases associated with transportation and oil extraction. Western countries also expressed concerns over the EACOP project's social implications, including the potential uprooting of people along the pipeline's path. But this was also a part of the propaganda to prevent Uganda from building the pipeline on its own and to halt the investment. Consequently, worldwide environmental organizations were tasked by the West with making the project notorious. The ultimate goal was to make the pipeline's development impossible so that Uganda would never profit from it. Western countries took into account not only the environmental and social consequences of the EACOP project, but also its financial risk. The project was a high-risk investment due to local political turmoil, potential cost overrun, and fluctuations in the price of oil globally. These factors raise questions about the project's financial viability and investors' capacity to get their money back. The claim made was that the pipeline would harm the country's ecosystem. It would have been questioned why Western countries started a project they thought would harm the environment. Above all, it reveals the hypocrisy of the West, seeming to care about the environment while ignoring the needs of the Ugandan people, who relied on the pipeline to improve their quality of life. Western countries decided to stop funding the East African crude oil pipeline project due to a number of financial, social, and environmental concerns. These concerns were often brought up in a way that highlighted the project's shortcomings and downplayed any potential benefits. The existence of additional pipelines worldwide, especially those in Western countries, cast doubts on the selective criticism of IECOP. If oil pipelines are harmful to the environment, why doesn't the International Environmental Organization denounce them and demand that they be shut down in the United States? This is because Western countries have kept these groups as pawns to disparage the projects of African countries. China, however, has stepped in to maintain the pipeline. China has stated that it will supply more than half of the $3 billion in debt that Uganda requires to construct a crude oil pipeline, after Western lenders withdrew due to strong opposition from environmental organizations. According to Uganda's Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development, the East African nation expects to wrap up negotiations with the Export-Import Bank of China and the China Export and Credit Insurance Corporation. According to Irene Betty, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry, Sinusor, the Chinese state-owned provider of export credit insurance, is collaborating with Exim Bank to fund the pipeline and is responsible for over half of the debt. You should be aware that Uganda would have to pay about $5 billion for the project. Connecting a loading and storage facility at the Tanzanian port of Tanga with the oil riches of Lake Albert, the financing is arranged at a 60-40 debt-to-equity ratio, with $3 billion secured by debt and the remaining $2 billion to be financed by shareholder equity contribution. Total Energy owns 62% of the pipeline, Tanzania Petroleum Development Corporation and Uganda National Oil Corporation controls 15%, and China National Offshore Oil Corporation, the biggest oil corporation in the nation, owns 8%. The 1,443-kilometer pipeline will carry crude oil from Uganda's Lake Albert oil fields in northwest Uganda to Tonga, Tanzania in the Indian Ocean. It will be then exported to foreign markets. According to Batibi, in addition to the Chinese lenders, Uganda anticipates receiving funding from other African organizations and the Islamic Development Bank of Saudi Arabia. Among them is the African Export-Import Bank. Uganda always took into account its other partners, even if it admitted that certain Western banks had stopped supporting the project. However, the partners' final $10 billion investment decision for the project, which included developing the oil fields and constructing the pipeline to carry crude oil collected from Hoima in western Uganda, was only announced the previous year. The Kingfisher oil field, situated on the eastern bank of Lake Albert in Uganda, is under Sunak's management, with a daily peak production goal of 40,000 barrels. The oil fields would be developed for an estimated $2.3 billion. The larger Telenga oil field, which reportedly cost over $4 billion to build, is managed by the French oil corporation Total Energies. A daily output of 190,000 barrels is anticipated. The development and production wells in Telenga and Kingfisher began drilling in January and June of 2023 respectively. The landlocked nation in East Africa expects to begin exporting oil by 2025. ECOP's principal debt arrangers and financial advisors are Standard Bank of South Africa and Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. According to BankTrack, an organization that keeps an eye on, supports and helps NGOs with regards to banks and projects they finance, Japan's Sumitomo Mitsui Banking Corporation also declined to fund the project. However, it is unclear if it continues to serve as a debt arranger and consultant. The issue reached the European Parliament last year, where members voted a motion urging the project to be halted due to environmental and human rights concerns. They also recommended that Total Energies not support the effort. This scenario highlighted the irony of the European Parliament's rejection of the East African crude oil pipeline proposal, because Western governments, particularly those in Europe, had previously offered insurance against the political risks associated with the project. The hypocrisy of the West must be noted here. Since the insurance was given considering political circumstances, the European Parliament deftly used the environmental justification to stop investment. This illustrates how deceitful, manipulative, and dishonest Western countries can be. In response to Western countries' requests that Uganda abandon its oil plants, Uganda argues that this approach ignores the wider picture. According to Irene Batibi, that will be incredibly unfair. There won't be a fair energy transition. There will be an unfair energy transition. She also underlined the need for a budget for the change, stating that Uganda believes the oil and gas sector can coexist with its objective for renewable energy. Furthermore, if these resources are harmful to the environment, why doesn't the US cease selling oil and LNG to Europe and the rest of the world, which brings in billions of dollars for the US? Hypocrisy is the answer. The Chinese embassy in Uganda last year criticized the European Union for attempting to undermine the nation's oil aspirations and supported Uganda's activities. The Chinese ambassador to Uganda, Chang Li-jong, stated that the EU shouldn't stop the pipeline and oil resources development because of environmental and human rights issues. But why did the West stop making investment? Put differently, it was an act of revenge for what Uganda had done. In 2021, Uganda expelled US Ambassador Deborah Malik for allegedly interfering with domestic affairs. The Ugandan government accused Malik of acting inappropriately for foreign diplomat and making offensive remarks. In addition, Uganda stopped working with the EU in 2022 due to fines resulting from human rights abuses. The Ugandan government denounced the EU for its duplicity and interference in local affairs. The last straw was Uganda's military cooperation with Russia, which was perceived as a rejection of the West. The pact covers military hardware exchange, coordinated exercises, and training. Even Uganda frequently accused Western countries and international forums of neocolonialism and hypocrisy, utilizing its independence and might to do so. For instance, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni accused the West of exploiting Africa and imposing its agenda on the continent in a 2022 speech to the UN's General Assembly. These actions have sparked rumors that Uganda is shifting away from its long-standing alliance with the West and towards China and Russia. Nonetheless, the West frequently expects subjugation, especially from countries in Africa, fearing that the pipeline might give Uganda courage to rebel. The West decided to cancel the investment. What do you think? Is China a reliable partner for Uganda? Should Uganda penalize Western countries by refusing to sell its crude oil to them once the pipeline is constructed? Do you believe Uganda will become one of the world's most developed countries as a result of this pipeline? Tell us what you think in the comment sections below.